the rancher who saved the wounded Apache girl. She helped him pursue justice for the past. The sun was sinking behind the distant hills when the rancher finished closing the last gate. The land around him stretched wide and quiet, the kind of quiet that came from years of open space and very few people. This ranch had been his life for decades. Every fence post, every trail, every water trough carried a memory. He liked the silence. It helped him keep the past where it belonged. As he turned his horse toward the main trail, something caught his eye near the edge of a dry creek bed. At first, he thought it was an animal, maybe a deer that had wandered too close and gotten hurt. But as he rode closer, he saw a small figure lying on the ground, barely moving. He dismounted slowly, his instincts alert. Living alone on a ranch taught a person to be careful. When he reached the figure, his heart tightened. It was a young girl, no more than a teenager. Her clothes were torn and dusty, and her face was pale beneath the dirt. She tried to move but winced in pain, letting out a quiet sound before going still again. The rancher knelt beside her, speaking softly so as not to scare her. She looked at him with wide, fearful eyes. There was pain there, but also something deeper, fear mixed with exhaustion. She did not speak. She only watched him as if trying to decide whether he was a threat. He noticed the marks on her arms and the way she guarded her side. She was hurt badly. This was no simple accident. Someone had chased her, or she had been running from danger for a long time. He hesitated for a moment. Helping her meant getting involved. Getting involved meant attention. Attention was something he had avoided for years, but leaving her there was not an option. He had made promises to himself long ago about what kind of man he would be. Slowly, carefully, he wrapped her in his jacket and lifted her. She was lighter than she should have been. That worried him even more. She flinched when he moved her, but she did not resist. Somewhere inside, she had decided to trust him. He took her back to his ranch house, a small, sturdy building that had weathered many storms. He laid her on the old couch and brought water. She drank slowly, carefully, as if every movement hurt. He cleaned her wounds as best he could, using what supplies he had. She watched him the whole time, silent, alert. Later, when she finally slept, the rancher sat at the kitchen table, staring at the worn wood beneath his hands. Questions crowded his mind. Who was she? Why was she out here alone? And who had hurt her? As the night deepened, distant sounds drifted across the land. A truck engine far away. Voices carried on the wind. The rancher's jaw tightened. He had a feeling this girl was not just lost. Someone might be looking for her. The girl woke suddenly, sitting up with a sharp breath. Her eyes darted around the room, panic flashing across her face. The rancher raised his hands gently, keeping his voice calm. He told her she was safe, that no one else was there. After a long moment, her shoulders relaxed. She spoke then, only a few words, spoken softly. She told him her name and that she was Apache. Her voice shook when she mentioned her family. She did not say what had happened, but her silence said enough. The rancher felt something stir inside him, an old memory, buried but not gone. He had grown up hearing stories about land disputes, broken promises, and people who never got justice. He had told himself those were problems of the past. But here, in his own home, was proof that the past never truly stayed buried. He offered her food, which she accepted carefully. Every small action showed how cautious she was, how used she was to danger. This was not a girl who had simply gotten lost. As the night wore on, the rancher checked the locks, turned off the lights, and kept watch. He slept lightly, listening for any sound out of place. More than once, he thought he heard something outside, but nothing came. In the early morning light, he stepped outside and scanned the land. Tire tracks near the creek bed caught his attention. Fresh, too fresh. His suspicion hardened into certainty. Someone had been searching. When he returned inside, the girl was awake. She watched him closely, reading his expression. He told her they would need to be careful. She nodded. She already knew. She tried to explain more, choosing her words slowly. Her family had been involved in a long fight over land and truth. People with power had silenced voices before. She had found something important, and after that everything changed. She had run. She had not stopped running until her body gave out. The rancher listened without interrupting. Each word felt heavy. This was not just her fight. It was a fight tied to history, to things many wanted forgotten. By midday, the rancher made a decision. He would protect her, not just until she healed, but until the truth had a chance to come out. He did not know yet how far that road would go, only that there was no turning back. As he looked out across his land, the sun rising higher, he understood something clearly for the first time in years. Silence might keep a man safe, but it never made things right. And this wounded girl who had stumbled into his quiet life was about to change everything. The part ends with the rancher closing the door behind them, knowing that whatever waited ahead would test his courage, his past, and the peace he thought he had already earned. The days that followed were slow and careful. The rancher did not rush anything. He knew that trust, once broken, took time to grow back. The girl stayed mostly quiet, watching him from the corner of the room or from the porch when the sun was warm. She moved gently, guarding her injured side, but each day she grew a little stronger. He set up a small bed near the window so she could see the open land. He thought it might help her feel less trapped. At night, the wide sky seemed to calm her. She would sit and watch the stars, her face softening in a way it never did during the day. They spoke very little at first. When they did, it was about small things. He asked if she was hungry. She nodded or shook her head. He told her when he needed to check the fences or tend the animals. She listened closely, as if every detail mattered. Silence filled the space between them, but it was not empty. It was careful, learning silence. The rancher noticed how alert she always was. A sudden sound would make her stiffen. The bark of a distant dog or the rumble of a truck far away would bring fear back into her eyes. When that happened, he would stop what he was doing and sit nearby, not speaking, just being there. Slowly she learned that not every sound meant danger. One afternoon, as he cleaned tools in the shed, she stepped inside for the first time. She stood at the door, hesitant. He looked up and smiled gently, inviting but not forcing. She took a few steps forward, her eyes drawn to the old photographs pinned to the wall. They showed a younger man, strong and hopeful, standing beside land that looked untouched. She pointed at one picture and asked who it was. He told her it was him, many years ago. She studied the photo, then looked back at him, as if comparing the man in the picture to the man before her. Something passed between them then, an understanding that time changes people, often in ways they do not expect. Later that evening, she spoke more freely than before. She told him about her grandmother who had taught her stories about their people, about land that carried memory and truth. She said those stories were not just history, they were warnings. The rancher listened carefully. He did not interrupt. He had heard stories too, growing up, stories about broken agreements and voices ignored. He had always thought those stories belonged to another time, another world. Now he realized how wrong he had been. As the girl recovered, she began helping with small tasks. She fed the chickens, watered plants near the house, and swept the porch. The rancher did not ask her to work, but he did not stop her either. He saw that helping gave her purpose, a way to feel useful instead of helpless. One morning, while they worked side by side, she finally told him why she had been so afraid. She spoke slowly, choosing each word with care. Years ago, her family had tried to bring attention to something that had been hidden. There were documents, old agreements, and testimonies that proved wrongdoing, but powerful people did not want the truth to surface. When her family pushed too hard, trouble followed. Promises were broken, warnings were ignored. Then came pressure, threats, and silence. Some members of her family had given up. Others had paid a heavy price. She had found something recently, something that could reopen the case. That was when she knew she had to run. The rancher felt his chest tighten as he listened. He thought of his own past, of a time when he had stood on the edge of doing something right and stepped back instead. He had told himself it was safer that way. Hearing her story made that old choice feel heavier than ever. That night, he could not sleep. He sat at the kitchen table long after the house had gone quiet, staring at the lamp's soft glow. He wondered how many people had chosen silence the way he had, and how many lives had been shaped by that silence. The next day, he told her a little about himself. About how he had once believed in fairness and rules. About how he had watched others lose everything while those responsible walked free. He admitted that fear had kept him quiet for years. She listened, her expression serious. When he finished, she said something simple but powerful. She said silence did not protect the truth. It only protected those who feared it. Those words stayed with him. As days passed, the rancher began noticing signs around the land again. A gate left slightly open. A truck slowing on the road before speeding up. Nothing clear enough to prove anything, but enough to keep him alert. He knew they were being careful, but so was someone else. The girl noticed his concern. She told him she had lived like this for a long time, always watching, always ready to move. She said she was tired of running. That night, the rancher made another quiet promise, to himself this time. He would not let fear decide for him again. They began organizing what little information she had saved. Old notes, names written on scraps of paper, dates remembered but never recorded. The rancher brought out maps and records he had collected over the years. Together they began connecting pieces, slowly forming a clearer picture. Working together changed their relationship. Trust deepened. She laughed once softly when one of the rancher's dogs stubbornly refused to move. The sound surprised them both. It felt like the first crack of light through heavy clouds, but danger still lingered. One evening, headlights appeared at the edge of the property and lingered too long. The rancher turned off the lights and watched from the window. The vehicle eventually drove away, but the message was clear. The girl stood beside him, her face calm but determined. She said she was ready to face whatever came next, but she did not want to face it alone. The rancher looked at her then and saw not just a wounded girl, but someone strong, shaped by loss and courage. He realized she had not only brought trouble into his quiet life, she had brought purpose. As the night settled in, they sat together, planning what the next step might be. Neither of them knew exactly how the road ahead would unfold, but one thing was certain now. They were no longer standing alone. The next phase of their journey began quietly, almost gently, but beneath the calm surface there was a growing sense of urgency. The rancher knew that hiding forever was not a solution. If the girl was right and something important had been buried for years, then time mattered. Truth had a way of fading if it was not protected. They started with what was close. The rancher brought out old boxes stored in a back room, boxes he had not opened in years. Inside were papers he had collected over time, land records, letters, notes from meetings long past. At the time, he had not known what to do with them. Now they felt heavier, as if they had been waiting for this moment. The girl sat at the table across from him, her posture straight despite the weakness still in her body. She watched every paper carefully. Some names made her pause. Some dates caused her to close her eyes for a moment, as if remembering something painful but important. They worked slowly. When something did not make sense, they did not rush past it. They talked through each detail. Sometimes the rancher explained how land agreements were supposed to work. Other times the girl shared what her elders had told her, stories passed down that never appeared in official records. Little by little, patterns began to appear. Certain names showed up again and again. Certain areas of land had changed hands in ways that did not feel honest. Promises made on paper had not been kept in real life. The rancher felt a mix of anger and regret. He had seen these things before, but he had never followed them far enough. Back then, it had felt safer to look away. Now, with the girl sitting across from him, he realized how many lives had been affected by that choice. Some days were easier than others. On good days, they made progress, connecting pieces that had been scattered for years. On harder days, the weight of it all pressed down on them. The girl would grow quiet, her eyes distant. When that happened, the rancher would suggest a break. They would step outside, letting the open land remind them why they were doing this. One afternoon, they drove into the nearest town. The rancher had avoided the place for years, but he knew they needed access to public records. The girl wore a hat pulled low, not to hide in fear, but to stay focused. She did not want attention. Inside the small records office, the air felt heavy with dust and old paper. The clerk behind the counter looked up with mild curiosity but said nothing. The rancher requested documents using names and dates they had discussed. The girl stood beside him, listening carefully. As files were placed on the counter, the rancher felt a strange tension. This was the line he had never crossed before. Asking questions meant leaving fingerprints behind. It meant stepping out of the shadows. They spent hours reading. Some pages confirmed what they already suspected. Others revealed details that surprised even the girl. There were notes about meetings that never included her community. Decisions made without consent. Changes approved quickly, without proper explanation. At one point, the girl touched a document gently, as if it were fragile. She said this was the place her grandmother had spoken of, the one that had been taken quietly. Her voice did not shake. It was steady, filled with certainty. When they left the office, the rancher noticed a familiar truck parked across the street. It did not move when they passed. He did not mention it, but his body stayed alert all the way back to the ranch. That night, they reviewed everything they had gathered. The rancher realized they were no longer just collecting stories. They were building something solid, something that could not be ignored easily. Still, doubt crept in. He wondered what would happen if they pushed too hard. He wondered if the system would protect the truth or bury it again. These thoughts kept him awake long after the lights were out. The girl noticed his silence the next morning. She asked him what he was afraid of. He answered honestly. He said he was afraid that doing the right thing might not be enough, that even with proof, justice might move slowly or not at all. She listened, then reminded him that truth had its own power. She said even when justice felt distant, speaking the truth changed something inside people. It made silence harder to accept. Those words gave him strength. Over the next few days, they reached out carefully to people who might help. An old friend of the rancher, someone who had once worked with records and law, agreed to look at what they had found. The meeting was quiet and cautious. No promises were made, but interest was clear. The friend warned them that pushing forward would bring attention. Not all of it would be friendly. The rancher nodded. He already knew. Signs of pressure increased. A neighbor asked strange questions. A vehicle appeared near the property again, this time staying longer. The rancher did not confront anyone. He focused on preparation. The girl remained calm through it all. Fear no longer guided her. Purpose did. She said she had spent too long being afraid. Now she wanted to be heard. One evening, as they organized their notes, the rancher realized something important. This was no longer just about land or old agreements. It was about dignity, about acknowledging harm and refusing to pretend it never happened. They finally found the piece they had been missing, a document that connected everything. It showed a decision made without approval, followed by actions that affected generations. The rancher stared at it for a long time, knowing what it meant. With this, they could move forward. Without it, everything might have fallen apart. The girl looked at him and asked if he was ready. He did not answer right away. He thought of his quiet years, his distance, his belief that staying out of trouble was the same as doing no harm. Then he thought of the girl, standing strong despite everything she had endured. He said yes, As the sun set that evening, casting long shadows across the land, the rancher felt something shift inside him. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was clear. They had uncovered the truth. Now came the hardest part, standing by it. The night settled in, calm on the surface but filled with expectation. Somewhere beyond the ranch, forces were already moving. But for the first time, the rancher did not feel alone in facing them. They had found the truth together. And once found, it could no longer be buried easily. The rancher and the girl had spent weeks preparing, gathering documents, organizing facts, and understanding the story behind each piece of evidence. They knew that exposing the truth would not be easy, but both of them felt a deep responsibility. This was bigger than either of them, and it touched on generations of people who had been silenced. One morning, the rancher drove the girl into town. They were going to meet a lawyer who had agreed to listen to their case. The drive was quiet at first. The girl stared out the window, her thoughts clearly elsewhere. The rancher watched her, seeing the determination in her eyes. She had been through so much, yet her spirit had not broken. At the lawyer's office, they spread out the documents, photographs, and notes they had carefully collected. The lawyer examined everything slowly, asking questions to clarify dates and details. The girl answered clearly, recalling events and names from memory. The rancher added context, explaining how records, though official on paper, often hid the truth in real life. After several hours, the lawyer leaned back and said it would not be easy. The case involved people with power and influence, and the system might resist change. But the lawyer also said that what they had was strong, evidence backed by memory, documents, and witness accounts. The truth could no longer be ignored. Leaving the office, the girl felt both hope and worry. She knew that revealing the truth would bring attention, some of it unwanted. The rancher drove slowly, careful to watch the roads and the people around them. He had learned from experience that those who wanted silence would often follow quietly before acting openly. Over the next few days, they took careful steps to protect themselves while making their intentions known. The rancher checked the land, secured gates, and arranged communication with trusted friends who could offer help if needed. The girl stayed calm, her presence steady. She understood danger, but she also knew the importance of moving forward. Soon, the case began to draw attention. Local authorities could no longer ignore the documents. People involved in the past events were confronted with questions they hoped would never come. Some were defensive, some silent, but the girl's courage and the rancher's steady support made it clear that they could not be pushed aside. The community around them reacted in different ways. Some supported them quietly, sending messages of encouragement. Others were skeptical or wary, not sure what would happen if the truth fully came to light. The rancher expected this. He had seen communities divided before, but he knew that doing the right thing required patience and persistence. When the day came for the first formal hearing, the rancher stood beside the girl in the courtroom. The room was quiet but heavy with expectation. The girl spoke clearly, recounting her family's story and the documents they had found. Her voice did not tremble. She spoke not just for herself, but for her community, for those who had been silenced. The rancher watched her carefully, offering silent support. He felt pride and relief in equal measure. Here was a young girl who had faced fear and danger, yet stood with courage and clarity. His own role was quieter but just as important. He provided context, evidence, and steady reassurance that the truth mattered. As the hearing continued, resistance became obvious. Some officials were reluctant to act. Some questioned the validity of memories and documents. But the girl and the rancher remained focused. Each question was answered patiently. Each piece of evidence was presented clearly. Slowly, the room began to shift. The truth could not be denied. Outside the courtroom, the rancher and the girl spoke with supporters. They received messages from people who had been affected by the past events, people who had longed for recognition and fairness. The rancher realized how far-reaching the impact could be, how one act of courage could touch many lives. The days that followed were a mixture of hope and challenge. There were small victories like documents being formally accepted, and setbacks like delays or questions that seemed designed to frustrate. Through it all, the rancher and the girl kept their focus. They reminded each other why they had started this journey and why it was worth seeing through. At home, the rancher noticed changes in the girl. She had grown stronger, more confident. Her eyes held a calm determination. She no longer flinched at every sound outside. She was ready to face the world, not just for herself but for those whose voices had been ignored. The rancher, too, felt a change within himself. He had spent years avoiding trouble, keeping silent when it mattered most. Now he saw that standing up, even when difficult, brought a kind of peace that silence never could. Courage was not easy, but it was transformative. One afternoon, a key witness came forward, corroborating the girl's story. The rancher accompanied her to ensure everything went smoothly. The witness shared details that aligned perfectly with the documents and memories they had collected. It was a turning point. For the first time, it seemed likely that justice could truly be served. The girl was calm but resolute. She understood the stakes, yet she refused to waver. The rancher admired her courage. He knew that she had carried fear and pain for much of her life, and yet she was still willing to stand tall, face scrutiny, and demand recognition for the truth. When the final hearing began, the atmosphere was intense. Every person in the room knew the weight of the moment. The girl spoke first, recounting events with clarity and strength. The rancher presented supporting evidence, explaining connections that might have been overlooked. Questions were answered carefully, and documents were reviewed in detail. By the end of the day, it was clear that their efforts were paying off. While not everything would change overnight, the foundations for justice had been laid. Some decisions were reversed, some acknowledgments made, and the girl's voice had been heard loudly and clearly. After the hearing, the rancher and the girl walked outside together. The sun was setting, casting warm light across the land. They had faced resistance, danger, and fear, but they had also discovered courage, trust, and the strength of truth. The rancher looked at the girl and realized that the journey had changed both of them. They had begun as two people connected by circumstance, but now they were partners in a larger mission. The past could no longer be ignored, and their work had begun to create a ripple that would extend far beyond their lives. As night fell, the rancher secured the ranch and checked the perimeter. The girl sat on the porch, watching the stars. She had faced threats and uncertainty, but now she felt a quiet satisfaction. For the first time in years, she believed that the truth could matter. The rancher joined her, bringing a cup of warm tea. They sat together, silent for a while, sharing the peace that comes after standing up for what is right. They knew there was still work to do, more battles ahead, but the first steps toward justice had been taken, and nothing could take that away. The part ends with the quiet understanding that courage and persistence could change the course of history. The rancher and the girl had proven that standing together, refusing to be silent, could create a new path where truth and fairness were finally possible. The road ahead remained challenging, but they were ready to face it side by side. The final phase of the journey did not arrive with loud celebration or sudden victory. It came quietly, carried by patience, steady effort, and the slow movement of truth through systems that were not built to move quickly. After the last hearing, life did not return to normal right away. Instead, everything felt different, as if the air itself had changed. The girl stayed at the ranch while official decisions were reviewed and written. She no longer felt like a visitor. She helped with daily work, walked the land, and spent long evenings talking with the rancher. The ranch, once only a place of silence for him, had become a place of shared purpose. Letters began to arrive. Some were formal, stamped and careful in their language. Others were handwritten notes from people who had followed the case quietly for years. Elders from her community sent words of gratitude. Families wrote about how seeing the truth spoken had helped them feel less alone. The girl read each letter slowly, sometimes more than once. Each one reminded her that what she had done mattered. The rancher noticed changes in her. She slept better. Her movements were lighter. The fear that once lived just beneath her skin had loosened its grip. She still carried pain, but it no longer controlled her every thought. One afternoon, official confirmation arrived. Certain past decisions were formally acknowledged as wrong. Records were corrected. Responsibility was named. It was not perfect justice, and it did not erase years of loss, but it was real. It was written down. It could not be undone quietly. The girl held the paper in her hands for a long time. She did not cry. Instead, she closed her eyes and took a slow breath. This was for her family, for her grandmother, for those who never lived to see this moment. The rancher watched her from across the room. He felt a weight lift from his chest that he had carried for most of his adult life. For years, he had believed staying quiet kept him safe. Now he understood that speaking up had given him something better than safety. It had given him peace. News of the decision spread slowly. Some people reacted with relief, others with discomfort. A few tried to downplay its importance, but the truth had been officially recognized, and that changed everything. Conversations began where silence once lived. The girl decided it was time to return to her community. Not to disappear, but to rebuild. She wanted to help preserve stories, protect records, and make sure what happened would never be buried again. The rancher supported her decision, even though the thought of her leaving left an ache he had not expected. Before she left, they walked the land one last time together. The sun was low, painting the ground with warm light. The girl stopped near the dry creek bed where everything had begun. She said this place had saved her life. The rancher shook his head and said she had saved his in a different way. When the day came for her to go, they did not say much. Some goodbyes did not need many words. She hugged him, firm and steady, and thanked him for choosing courage when it mattered. He told her the door would always be open. After she left, the ranch felt quiet again, but it was not the same silence as before. It was not empty. It was full of meaning. The rancher returned to his routines, but now each task felt connected to something larger. He followed news from the community, reading updates about programs, meetings, and cultural work the girl had become part of. She wrote to him often, sharing progress and challenges. Her letters were hopeful, grounded, strong. Months passed, then a year. One spring morning, the rancher received an invitation. The girl's community was holding a gathering to honor those who had helped bring the truth forward. The rancher hesitated at first. He did not seek attention, but he knew this was not about recognition. It was about standing together. When he arrived, he was welcomed warmly. Elders thanked him. Families shook his hand. The girl stood beside him, confident and calm, introducing him not as a hero but as a man who chose not to turn away. The gathering was simple and respectful. Stories were shared. Songs were sung. History was spoken aloud, not as a wound but as a lesson. The rancher felt humbled. He realized that justice was not just about correcting records. It was about restoring dignity. As the day ended, the girl walked with him and said she planned to study law and history to protect stories and rights going forward. The rancher smiled. He said the world needed people like her. Returning home, the rancher reflected on how far they had both come. What began as a quiet choice on a lonely evening had become a turning point in two lives and many more. He still lived alone on the ranch, but he was no longer disconnected. He spoke up more. He paid attention. He understood that justice did not belong only in courtrooms. It lived in daily choices. On clear nights, he still sat on the porch and looked at the stars. Sometimes he thought of the girl, now grown into her purpose. Sometimes he thought of the past, not with regret but with understanding. The story did not end with perfection. Life rarely did, but it ended with something stronger than fear. It ended with truth spoken, with silence broken, with two lives forever changed by the decision to stand up when it mattered most.